So today, we want to share our experience in fine-tuning and using this multi-security core set for the large number of customers that we have and thousands of servers that we have installed on. So some of the goals here today are to understand multi-security, what that means, but also to set the right expectations when you're using or before you start using multi-security. Because setting the right expectation is the key in getting a successful result. Right, and we're going to share our experience about tuning, and continuous tuning, and how to care for your multi-security and especially the core set. And this is a talk by the practitioners for the practitioner and the curious, who are thinking about using multi-security or just want to learn more about multi-security. So this is a bit of an agenda. This is and we talk about WAF in general, and we're going to talk about more multi-security and how you get ready, both mentally and technically for multi-security. And then talk about core set, fine-tuning, and what's new with the new release 3.0 and currently 3.02. So before we dive into this nitty-gritty details about multi-security, a little bit about our network and where we work, because that kind of comes into context of what we are discussing and how we are approaching this problem. So Verizon got into this content delivery network business through the acquisition of this company called Edgecast. So we were formerly known as Edgecast, and now we are part of Verizon currently. And we have thousands of servers installed around the world at about 100 plus locations, and multi-security is running on all of them. Right, so that's the first line of defense, that way your HTTP or HTTPS configuration terminates, and where we get to see the HTTP traffic and where we get to inspect good, bad, and the suspicious stuff that comes on the HTTPS or HTTP. We do have a large number of customers, and some of them are what we call the fully managed customers, in that my team work with them to manage their security posture through web settings and also other security settings. So getting into a little bit about, what is WAF, right? Because when you go talk to different vendors, they might have different definitions. Probably the authoritative document on, what WAF is and how to evaluate WAF is an OWASP document called the WAF Evaluation Criteria, or WAF. That's still version 1.0. It is in need of being updated. 2.0 is in progress. But these are the characteristics of what a WAF is. Right, so it operates on the HTTP layer, and as such, it can see the HTTP transactions, both the request and the response, all the headers and content and posts and so on. And the main goal of this is to address, application level security issues like those defined in OWASP 10, like SQL injection, or cross-site scripting, or information disclosure, remote access, and things like that. But it can also operate on the network level information like network subnets, or even like the geo IP locations and so on. So why do you use WAF? Right, well, obvious reason is to detect threats or look for the suspicious traffic. That's what we call the detection. And once you can detect, what's bad or what's suspicious, you can take action, and it could be in terms of mitigation. And then you could be blocking that traffic, or you could be just monitoring it until it gets worse, or you could be taking the downstream actions needed as depending on what an attack is. It's also good for virtual patching, in that there's a framework breakage that you have heard about in the news, and you don't have time, or you don't have enough time to actually deploy that update, because it's going to take weeks to rebuild the code, go through the QA, make sure there are no side effects that you don't like. So by using WAF, you can specifically block that vulnerability from being exploited. And also, last but not least, policy enforcement. And by that I mean like attack surface reduction. Like you can say like I only speak HTTP 2.0. Anyone trying to speak HTTP 1 or 1.1, I don't want to talk to them. Or I only support certain HTTP verbs like get and post and so on. I don't want to support options And it can be minimally effective in dealing with what we call the automated threats. Like these are the web bots that are doing, legitimate but things that negatively impact you on your website. So a little bit about bot security and its brief history. It was started back in 2002 by this gentleman named Ivan Ristic. You guys probably are familiar with it. He has moved on to do more things related to SSL, like SSL Labs.com and so on. And it was started as a mod for Apache, but it later became ported to Windows, IIS, and Nginx. It uses a language called the set rules in defining tools, and you can also use Lua to write tools, but set rules is like the first language that is supported in writing these rules, which later became as like a core rule set. And it's modular, and core rule set serves as a standard and default web rules for more security. So more security, when you say more security, there are actually two parts, two components, two sets of bits that you need to install and have it running. One is the engine. An engine is a separate OWASP project, and there's the core rule set. Right, so the engine, the latest released stable version of engine is 292, and 3.0 engine is in like an alpha or beta kind of state right now. We have experts in the area want to talk about that. And there is core rule set. And core rule set 3.0 came out late last year, and we have done the bug fixes and optimization, so we are at now 3.02, right? And they two work together, but you don't need 3.0 engine for 3.0 rule set to work. And there's some compatibility in between them. So 292 words definitely support 3.0 rule set. And there are two deployment modes. You can deploy it as part of your web server, so you can install the mod on your Apache or IIS or Nginx, or you can use it as a reverse proxy, and then you can load it onto your load balancer, SSL terminator, or in our case, we load this onto our CDN as like a first point of contact between the browser or the end device and the other end of the HTTP connection. There are some principles in coming up with this when they started designing more security, and one is to be flexible. Right, so more security by itself doesn't even include any rules. This core rule set is a separate project that, to give you like the default and a standard set of rules. Right, so you can write all the rules you want on your own if you choose to, but core rules set get you started. The other principle of this is the passiveness. What that means is that, it doesn't take any action unless you explicitly tell more security to do that. And the reason is that it doesn't want to interfere with the behavior of your web application. And last but probably the most important one is the predictability. Right? More security, and especially the rules that you write or rules from the core rule set, they are predictable in a way that they do what you tell them to do. They do what the regex is written to do. And there's no surprise in that, it doesn't go to the cloud and check something, and the behavior changes over time because of this and that. So you don't get into that kind of predictable behavior. So this is, in my view, it is a great thing that it works exactly as you intended to make it work. And how many other pieces of software you can say about that? So these are the capabilities, these are the use cases, if you will, of how to use more security. Monitoring, obviously, but you can also use it for like HTTP logging. Because it can see through all the entire transaction request and response. It can be used, or even in some cases abused, as a way to log a lot of HTTP content. Because your web server logs are not going to be enough to give you all the information you want. And of course, attack detection and mitigation. That's a standard use case for web. Virtual patching, we talked about it earlier. It buys you time. But a couple of other things that you can also use more security for is access control through certain URLs being blocked or certain extensions being blocked. And the reason is that you may have sometimes unintentional exposure of some URL that shouldn't be there in the first place, some data that shouldn't be there, and you can use more security to block that URL offline. maximum number of arguments or maximum size of each argument and so on. So more security is great, but it has some cost. The software is free, common set is free, then your time is not free, but also it has some performance that you have that income on the server that it is running. So you should understand some of these, right? So if you're doing something like the file scans, like virus scans, more security supported, but it uses the virus scan engine. Or if you're calling out to an external, making something like an external blocking call, some routes are more noisy than others, and depending on how you set up the logging, it can cost you in terms of like CPU time and disk storage and so on. Second thing to consider, using any web, especially with more security, is to minimize the false positives because they can, impact on your performance. But the holy grail of this is like, you want this to, you want your more security so that to scale linearly. What I mean is that as you have more transactions, more HTTP transactions, the cost on each transaction should be fixed. You should add more resources as your transactions grow, and maybe shrink back as your transaction load gets less. And you can do that through some deployment mechanism, elastic scaling, or you can use some mechanism like a CDN to dynamically grow and shrink your server pool. But the goal is that the penalty that you pay for using more security should be fixed per transaction. And more security itself does pretty well depending on how you use it. And this graph is from this more security handbook written by Christian Polini, and it just came out a couple of months ago. Depending on how you tune it, CRS 3.0 has the paranoia level, so the performance it is pretty good, but at some point you start hitting some of the performance issues. So you need to keep in mind that. But here also there are some limitations. That's not just for security, but web in general, right? It's not a fix-it-all solution. So if anybody tells you that this solution is going to fix all your ills about software security, that's not true. More security is the first line of defense. It'll do what it's designed to do, but it's not going to cure all your ills. It's not also set it and forget it type of solution. It does need continuous care and maintenance. And it doesn't definitely replace other types of security mechanisms and controls that you have in your SDLC, like threat modeling, security testing, source code scanning, and so on. Right? And it's not risk-free. Whenever you use signature-based or any security control, there's a balance between false positives and false negatives, and what side you're going to err on is highly dependent on your organization's, your taste for risk. And it's not free even with the open source. The code is free, but your time is not free and hardware is not free. But this is a slide that I kind of picked up from David Casey, his presentation about a year ago, and WAPs now have become a standard part of secure web deployment mechanism. Right, so that's a change in thinking that, go back like 10 years ago, OWASP community thinks like, if we do all the secure SDLC right, we don't need web. From then that we shifted into like, web is not bad. It buys you time because when there's like a framework breakage, it's going to take days to update the signature in web, but it's going to take weeks to release a new software. From that to today's thinking, which I agree with, is that even if your software is perfect and you don't have the framework breakage today, there's still going to be people who are attacking you just because they don't like you or for whatever reason, or because you are on the internet. And web is great at dealing with these unwanted traffic away from you. So before you get started with web, I didn't take these out of like out of work or fortune cookies, although I also did them fortune cookies. 3 knows: know yourself, know your adversary, and know your environment. Knowing yourself means that your risk level, right? So in our experience, dealing with some publishers, for them having their website up and running is more important. And even if you have to block some of the users and some of them could be legitimate, it's okay as long as their website is up and running, right? And that's very different from e-commerce that they want performance, but they also don't want any false positives. So they don't want to block any legitimate users, even if it is just a tiny bit, because it has direct impact on their bottom line. And the banks may have a different big concern about, I'm more concerned about credit card-like data or security, social security-like data leaving the system, so they may be more concerned about inspecting the HTTP response. How much is your downtime worth, right? Some companies, the downtime is worth literally like $1 billion an hour, and for some, it may be just okay tolerable, right? And you have PCI compliance or any other compliance requirement, but most importantly, what's your security posture and what side you're going to err on. You're going to be tighter and risk some false positive, or you're going to be a little looser and not lose any traffic and some potential customer. And also we ask these kind of questions like, what are the security incidents or the more likely the attacks that you have received in the past, because that kind of helps us into tuning, setting up these configuration that will suit your situation. And your environment is very important, especially when you configure and continuously manage this. Having access to the developers and software architect, how your software is set up, what are the cookies that you use usually, or what are the maximum sizes of your security parameters and file size and things like that, or do you really need options? Do you need delete in HTTP verbs? So that is very, and how do you want to block it, right? You want to block it with 403, or you want to redirect it to a pretty page, or you want to redirect it to a pretty page with some ID that the customer can call in and complain if they think it's a false positive. But last but not least, this is from our experience, people don't always, even after people deploy or people pay for web, sometimes they abandon it. And the number one reason they abandon it is because, especially with more security, there's so many alerts, I don't know what to do with it, right? So it can be frustrating, and it kind of breaks my heart because now that we have this product running, and we're getting paid, but the customer is not getting benefit out of it, right? So fine-tuning can be difficult, and separating signal from noise is expensive, and out-of-the-box settings rarely ever works, so you're going to need to continuously manage it. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Robert, and he's going to talk more about how we continuously manage web settings.
All right, thank you guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the core rule set. So as Tin was referring to earlier, this is basically a rule set that you plug into the mod security engine. It's the most commonly used one, and it's a self-service rule set. And what I mean with that is I've seen quite a few WAFs in my years, and one thing that always bothered me the most was if you're just given a few simple checkboxes that basically let you have these very grand things of like, okay, here's a checkbox for SQL injection attacks, versus here with the entire rule set being at your beckoning, basically. You can turn on individual rules, and you can have thousands of rules, but you have the granularity to be able to turn those rules on and off, versus just basically a category that you may turn on or off on some commercial WAFs that you guys have maybe seen in the past. It targets the OWASP top 10, obviously, so there's no reason to cover what those are, but those are your cross-site scripting attacks, your SQL injection attacks, your remote file inclusions, path traversal, things like that. It's a regex-based rule set, which is really nice because once I get to the exclusions part, you'll see too that a lot of times it's easier to exclude something if you have the ability to exclude it via regex as opposed to strings or whatnot. So it's the most commonly deployed rule set for mod security, like I was saying, and it can go hand in hand with some commercial rule sets. So there's TrustWave rule sets and things like that that are also there for mod security, but we're going to focus on the core rule set. It does allow for pretty lightweight inspection, like Tin was referring to earlier. So the performance impact is not as great as maybe you would think, which is great. Of course, again, if you're scanning larger files and things like that being uploaded, you are going to see a bigger performance impact. So now, to give you an idea of this is one of the accounts that I worked on over the last year. You can't see the numbers quite probably, but we started out at 45 million alerts per month. And that's basically turning the rules on, put it in alert mode, and then you're assaulted with all of these alerts. And my day-to-day job is to make that curve go down to where it finally plateaus, and you'll see we're only down to a few thousand alerts a month, which should be actual attacks, right? So this is kind of like music to my ears because it's nice to see this curve. And I just want to put the emphasis on it because so many people that I will run into with our customers that will turn on the WAF and they get so overwhelmed immediately, which is totally understandable. I wouldn't want to stare at 45 million alerts every month either. So as far as fine-tuning goes, there's a specific approach that we take. We have the ability to run profiles concurrently. So what we do is you can run it in alert-only mode basically and collect that data. This could be over the course of a week. Maybe if you are e-commerce, maybe you want to run it over the course of a special sale that you're running. So it kind of depends on what your environment is to see how much data you want to gather in alert-only mode. And once you have enough data, you can start making decisions on what is a false positive and what is an actual attack. Now, there's a little bit of knowledge required, obviously, here, where you are able to identify what is good and what is bad. But for the most part, what's important is to correlate all of those fields of the data that we've collected to kind of make that decision for you. The WAF cannot make the perfect decision for you. It needs your guidance, basically. So once we've decided what a false positive is, we can start excluding things. Now, one thing about mod security that I think is great is the anomaly scoring threshold. And basically, it starts at 1 and goes as far as you want. And what it is basically is it's a threshold that needs to be met for the WAF to consider a request malicious. So if the threshold is lower, it will take less for the WAF to deem something malicious, as opposed to when, let's say, my threshold is set at 20, for instance, and I'll show some examples in a minute, then it would take far more rules to be able to trigger that WAF and then deem the alert malicious. So here's an example. If you can see here, the first request is our blocking profile, which is basically the one that that is in production, the one that we want to be really careful with, because, and especially with my day-to-day, my job is to keep the website secure, but definitely not to take it down, right? So usually your blocking mode is always going to have a higher anomaly threshold than your alerting mode. And as you can see here, in the first example, we have our blocking threshold set at 15. After the first rule fires, we're at a 3. After the second rule fires, we're at a 6. After the third, we're at 11. So we're still under 15. So far, the request is still good. Then once we hit that last rule, we're taken up to 21, which is over 15, and now the WAF has deemed this alert malicious. Same thing with the alert-only mode with the second request. As you can see, first request, same thing, hits 3. Second rule fires hit 6. Third rule fires hit 11, but our threshold is only 10. So now we are firing on one rule earlier than we are on our blocking profile. So there's something that's pretty important about excluding things, and here's the danger of having a self-service rule set as well, is a lot of times users will see that, okay, 981172 or whatever the rule ID may be is firing a ton of false positives, and their first reaction is, well, we have hundreds of rules, let's just turn this one off. But then you're turning that rule off for your entire website. And there's no real need to do that. The thing that we always try to do is to keep as many rules active as possible. And turning a rule off is basically a no-no in my book. Usually you can get around it in some way, shape, or form. So that involves getting intimate with those WAF alerts and kind of understanding where they're coming from. This is where it helps a lot. if you work very closely with the actual developers on the app that may know how the app works, how it's supposed to behave, what's going to break, things like that. So making safe exclusions. So one thing that people will also do, which is another mistake, is to blanket whitelist URLs and say, okay, I see in this specific path, I'm basically getting a false positive, so why not go ahead and just whitelist that URL? Well, if you go that approach, you're technically whitelisting entire apps, and then your WAF isn't really doing much for you in the first place. So consider those very carefully. There are going to be situations where you may have to have a URL exclusion, but it's always safer to see what else we can do first. So, and a lot of this is taken care of with the anomaly scoring threshold, like I was referring to. So feel free to use that threshold to kind of get to a baseline where you feel like you have enough false positives to be able to work on, enough data to work on, but also that you're not completely overwhelmed. And paranoia mode with CRS 3.0 makes that even better, and I'll get to that in a minute. So simple exclusion example, this is very distilled down. Obviously, this in live production, this would look a little bit more complicated, but basically what mod security allows you to do is to perform a rule target update. Now, what that means is I'm basically saying if this argument is a false positive, in this case email, do not inspect this argument for this specific rule. So if I see that an argument has a problem with a specific rule ID, I will target that rule ID in just one update to basically say exclude this argument from this rule. So that's great because that now not only did we not have to whitelist any URLs or the path itself, now we've been able to just whitelist the argument. We don't have to turn the rule off. The rule continues to be on. And you can do this for arguments, argument names, and as well, cookies. Cookies are a big problem for anyone that's ever worked with a WAF. Cookies get flagged constantly. You have to take a bit care with whitelisting those as well, only because there are situations where a cookie could be manipulated in a bad way. However, in the day-to-day attacks that you see, that would be quite a bit of a targeted attack. So. And with cookies, I've found a lot of times cookies will flag all across the website, so sometimes it does bode well to basically globally exclude a cookie, but we still take the approach of basically taking it one rule at a time, because again, we don't want to turn rules off, we don't want to whitelist anything that we don't necessarily need to. On to CRS 3.0. I put this in because it has a movie poster, and a mod security rule set with a movie poster is good in my books. It's the first major CRS release since 2.2.9, which was in 2013, and it includes the paranoia mode, which I will detail more in a second. And lots of what we'll call problem rules have been identified and removed. Some of them have been combined with others. It's a much more concise rule set than it was before, and it's a lot easier to maintain as well. And the false positive rate is much lower in 3.0 than it was with 2.2.9. So CRS 3.0 has a few things to highlight. A lot of remote code execution rules have been added, and a lot of the SQL injection and cross-site scripting rules have also been joined into the libinjection library, which was added with 3.0. And there's lots of great documentation too. I think mod security can be a little bit daunting sometimes, especially if you're getting started out on it. But there's great documentation recently, and like Tin had mentioned, Christian Fellini's book that just came out a few months ago is fantastic. So there's lots of great stuff for you to kind of study up and learn with this stuff. So. Paranoia mode is basically, it was built on the back of anomaly scoring mode. And if you can remember what I was referring to, the anomaly scoring mode of having 1 to a larger integer depending on how large the attack is, paranoia mode is a bit simpler. It's just basically, if you can imagine a slider from 1 to 4, 1 being the least sensitive and 4 being the most sensitive. So if you would set up mod security 3.0.2 out of a box, you would basically start it out at paranoia level 1. You get about 150 rules. Very few false positives. So this is what I would suggest you run first, And then if you feel that you're comfortable with the false positive rate and you make sure that you're not breaking anything, you can move on to paranoia level 2, which gives you 30 additional rules. But now you're definitely going to start seeing some false positives, and some of that elbow grease that we refer to with fine-tuning is still going to be required. And then level 3 gives you 15 more rules, and now we're definitely getting to it to where you need to start being careful before you turn those on into a blocking mode first. And then by the time you get to paranoia level 4, you would hope that your WAF is already basically fine-tuned. And if it's not fine-tuned by the time that you hit 4, then probably you're going to run into some trouble. So. Alrighty, and that is basically it. Any questions?
Hi.
Yep.
Is this on?
Yep.
Hello? Yes.
There you go.
So first of all, I deeply admire your courage, because there are not too many people nowadays who are willing to come out and talk about WAF. They kind of fell out of fashion a few years ago, and so that is great. The tough question I have to ask is, given the amount of time you spent working on web application firewalls, would you recommend to a security team to invest in web applications firewall, knowing that they're essentially going to be spending probably 1 or 2 full-time employees on them? Or should they direct their resources to fixing the applications directly? What is your take on that?
First, my take would be, I think that there's a world where both can coincide, and I understand some organizations will have to make one decision or another. Considering that WAF is your first line of defense, and even if you have it set to lower anomaly scoring thresholds or lower paranoia levels, I would still consider that to be better, especially with 302, it coming out of the box with paranoia level 1. You already have 150 rules or so that you're basically working on. And I think that little bit, especially since it's open source and you can get it running, I think that is essential. And I think WAF should be a part of your security practice in general. Not to say that there's not a place, to fix your bugs and things like that, but I think they also go hand in hand. A lot of times we can provide feedback to our customers and say, we're flagging really hard on this, you shouldn't be passing things this way, and it's actually feedback we can provide to the web app developers as well. So.
And also, it doesn't take 2, 3, 4 times employees to manage it. Or even like for complex environments like Wave and Verizon, Robert probably spend about 1 day a week, and his counterpart in IT security will probably spend about 2, 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a 1 full-time employee.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on who manages the WAF? Have you seen any situations? So obviously security teams are typically strapped for resources and stuff like that. Have you seen developers take this on at all in any of your interactions with various clients where they try to implement some sort of WAF on their IIS server or the like?
For the most part, I'd say the stewards of WAFs with our customers are usually based in IT, but it's great when we have a security team on the other end. That's usually our easiest customers, obviously. But then it usually comes down to IT folks, and then we don't really mess with the developers too much on their end. But we do interface with them in some cases, like I was saying, if we see that there's a problem or they're passing a crazy string in some argument that obviously is getting flagged that we're not going to be able to do anything about, we provide that feedback to our customers so that they can provide the feedback back to the devs too.
So one of the things that the WAF has to do is if it detects an anomaly, let's say in a parameter or something like that, it has to log that parameter. Otherwise, you cannot really investigate that. So one of the problems I have seen with mod security and its rules are there is a way in mod security to divert these logs to a different log so that they don't mix with your normal Apache logs. However, the rules, each rule can be done in a different way, and sometimes they end up in all those places. Have you seen that? How have you tried to solve that?
So there's a few different levels of logging that mod security does provide. There's obviously, a quote unquote a 9 basically, where it will basically log everything, versus where it could be like, I think ours is set much lower than that, because it's a lot of data that we're pulling in, a lot of WAF alerts. So in that case, cutting off and identifying what information you really need. Like maybe you don't need to log the entire thing. Maybe I just need to know what rule did it fire on, where did it fire on, what was the refer, what was the user agent, and what was the actual matched value that it matched on in that specific rule, and then I would go from there. And also purging your logs. Obviously, we have certain time windows both internally and externally for our customers that we say this is kind of a cutoff date, since we can't keep those forever.